Is Toby in the chat? Okay, Toby might be missing. Is Leah here?
Yes, I'm here. Hi everyone. Congrats for making it this far and good luck for the round.
Li Wei?
Hello everyone, my name is Li Wei. I'll be paneling. You can address us as a panel. Good luck to both teams.
And last but not least, Farhan. Farhan Shah. Okay, OC, if you can help contact Farhan Shah and Victor, please. Thank you. I don't think they're here yet.
Yep, sorry about that.
Hello? Right, sorry, my bad. Farhan, he, him, all the best for the final.
Is Toby here?
Toby can't make it. We're making a judge swap right now.
All
Sorry
right,
about that.
no problem.
All right, hi. Taki will be taking over Toby's place.
Okay,
Taki's here. Good luck.
Okay, yay. Okay, we can start now. On the motion, the House will ban TV programs and movies from portraying convicted criminals as sympathetic. I welcome the Prime Minister. Here.
Sorry, give me a minute. Hold on. It's echoing. Right. My DPM is actually in the toilet. And let me get my phone real quick. I don't think. Where's my phone? Jeez. Where's my phone? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yep. Give him a minute. It's coming. Yeah. Are you done? Alright, it's done. So sorry about that. Wait. Yeah. All right. All right. The world that opposition propagates is one that is morally corrupting. So the stance that we take on proposition is that we are more than okay with banning all non-fiction TV programs that portray convicted criminals as sympathetic. A few points of framing before I move on. Firstly, we're debating in the context of high-profile criminals like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, right? It's unlikely to be about average criminals because people don't really care about what these criminals have done, right? So secondly, we tell that we think it is extremely hard for us to sympathetically portray these criminals for the crimes that they have done, for example, serial murder and rape. On our side of the house, we are also able to raise awareness to sexual assault and domestic violence through media and infographics and objective information. For example, things that are non-specific and ways to stop future crime, right? We don't have any doubt that is casted on these people, on these evil people in the first place. And we have to defend a world on a proposition where people learn about these criminals through news and through objective sources. So the mechanism on proposition is simple, right? We basically ban all TV programs, all non-fiction TV programs that portray convicted criminals as sympathetic, for example, in documentaries without any exceptions, right? The argument here, firstly, is principle. We think it's principally immoral for us to portray these high-profile criminals as sympathetic for a few reasons. Before I move on, characterization, right? These high-profile cases are uniquely different to the average robbery and theft that you see in the streets, right? We tell you that these cases are horrible, right? And like, for example, it's cases with extensive amount of information that exists on the internet, online anyways, right? For example, like the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, a lot of people know about what they have done, right? So moving on to my analysis. So these convicted criminals don't deserve sympathy for a few reasons. Why? So if the state is okay with portraying them as sympathetic, there must be a justification for it. And we tell you that in most cases, there's very unlikely that there's any cases that it is naturally sympathetic for these criminals, right? For these criminals that have killed so many people in the past. So we recognize, secondly, that these criminals like Bundy and Dahmer might be abused in the past, but we tell you that we don't see that as a moral justification for them to inflict harm and damages on their victims as a result of the abuse, right? So at best for opposition, this analysis can only show how the state has failed to protect them in the past, which is not a burden that we have to defend a proposition. So the reason why this industry why like these industries of portraying like high profile criminals as sympathetic is booming and rising is because directors and companies, they tend to flip the narrative and existing perception towards these high profile criminals. Like for example, or if you think of people are curious about like this change in narrative, like for example, Jeffrey Dahmer, right, he's a murderer, but then if you switch the story and say, oh, this man might perhaps have been abused by his dad, that evokes like curiosity among the audiences. So what is the impact of this? Firstly, we tell you that when you portray these individuals as sympathetic, you give rise to the idea that convicted criminals and the criminal justice system is problematic and flawed. So we are not saying that on our side, people think criminals are good people. That's a clarification that we have to make importantly, or any less worse, right? But when movies and pop cultures are sympathetic, it severely weakens like the severity of the actions and crimes that these individuals have committed in the past. So what does this look like? It looks like shifting attention away from criminal acts towards something that is obscuring these issues, right? From on their side, these directors and TV shows might give hint that this criminal may be justified, this action that they committed might be justified, or he may have been wrongfully convicted, right? For example, if you give the impression that the court may convict an innocent young man that is abused by his father, like just imagine how how interesting that story would be, right? And we think that's morally corrupting. So what is the purpose of this criminal justice system? We tell you that the purpose is to ensure that we don't allow there to exist any justification for people to exist to commit any crimes in the first place. So you know what Ted Bundy has committed, right? Like he killed and sexually assault like, I don't know, 20, 30 plus women, and ops work to glorify these high profile criminals and making them like a celebrity. The idea that somehow these individuals can feel sympathetic, like audiences can feel sympathetic towards this criminal is problematic, right? For example, like people might think that, hey, maybe this guy had a hard life, so it's okay for him to kill people, I guess. Like that is the notion that they portray on their side of the house is extremely problematic. Notice crucially how the attention shifts the criminal, not to the criminal and not the crime itself, right? This is important because instead the attention should be on the harm that has inflicted on the person, that is inflicted by this criminal, right? Before I move on, take a POI.
So have a taste of reality. Are the people in this show going to glorify very bad crimes like rapists?
Sorry. Can I just break you? I was muted just now. Can you say that again?
Okay, so have a taste of reality. Is the show going to glorify people who are obviously already bad, like rapists? And even if they show some sympathetic viewpoint, do people automatically think he's a good person?
No. We tell you that the fact that these shows give rise to the fact that to suggest that these people might perhaps have a very like sad past, or like may have sympathetic elements to them, gives rise to the discussion that these people the actions might be justified. We think that shouldn't exist in the first place at all. So moving on to my second argument, that the process that these criminals are portrayed is inherently harmful, right, through TV programs, right? A few points of characterization. These TV programs are produced by profit-driven film companies. What is their incentive? They want attention and they want people to watch the movie that they produced, right? So in the vast majority of cases, they're only able to film these movies if they make money, right? So profit is the biggest incentive that triumphs over every other incentive. For example, let's just assume that they're benevolent, right? So to choose between accurately portray this criminal or profit, they will no doubt choose profit because it has direct impacts on their career, right? So moving on to my analysis. The reason why these directors or these companies make a movie is to challenge existing norms. So before Dahmer was filmed, everyone knows that Dahmer is a serial killer, right? So, however, these like profit-driven directors, they recognize a part of Dahmer's story that was interesting or at least marketable, which is the only reason why they want to put Dahmer on TV and not other average criminals, right? So and furthermore, to make it a movie, you have to twist facts, you have to twist reality, you have to twist stories, right? The reasoning is simple. because you want people to keep watching. They want episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, right? And in life, there's never there will never always be a hook for you to continue episode 2, right? So when these stories are portrayed, like when these criminals are portrayed like a story, right? We tell that it will crowd out other news on the other side of the house, right? For example, if you hear Jeffrey Dahmer, you think about him being abused child when it should be how he's a monstrous serial killer instead. Or I might say, if these companies are profit-driven, then the market incentive will incentivize them to create an accurate portrayal of these criminals. We tell you the premise of this argument is only if people want this. It's only if people want to watch accurate portrayal, right? We tell you in all cases, no one really care about accurate representation. Why? Firstly, audiences don't really care, right? They want to watch something that's interesting. They want that which feeds into the flawed depiction, right? And secondly, they don't have a foot in the story anyways, right? So the consumers don't have incentive to want accurate portrayal unless they are the victim themselves. So in their mind, they think that, oh, if Jeffrey Dahmer is already convicted, why do we care, right? So we tell you that market forces it's impossible for the market force to shift this industry in the way that opposition might characterize them to. So the impact of this is that we don't think these criminals should ever be humanized at all. So the question is, why do we even want to popularize these people? Why do we even what help does that bring to society, right? So not to mention, right, uniquely, many of these criminals, they convict these crimes for attention, for popularity. So the worst case is that you feed into these people, they will repeat exactly what these criminals have done, seeing that they have gained attention, fame on TV, right? So ultimately, what we tell you is in the world of opposition is one that is extremely disrespectful against the victims and the criminal justice system. With that, I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thanks to the PM. Welcoming to the stage, LO. Here.
All right. Am I visible and audible?
Yep.
All right. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Inside proposition's world, society deems these victims as a villain and locks them out of accessing good legal services. Proposition wants to demonize criminals and view them as someone that is evil, someone that doesn't deserve help. And these people who are oftentimes in unfortunate circumstances are pushed to the bottom of the social hierarchy. This debate was never about rapists. This debate was about how proposition locks out these people. Before I move into my two substantive for today, I want to provide a few responses to proposition. 1. Even if the Jeffrey Dahmer shows a sympathetic viewpoint towards Jeffrey Dahmer, it doesn't mean people are actually going to buy that Jeffrey Dahmer was a good guy. The scale of people that are actually going to think that he was a good person is going to be so marginal compared to people that think he was a bad person. You're right, actually, PM. Everyone does in fact think that Dahmer was a serial killer. Look around you. No one in this room actually thinks Jeffrey Dahmer was a good guy. Proposition was extremely unrealistic coming into this case, and the characterization of the world was also uncharitable. But secondly, the scale of impact that our case is going to give you is the impact on society. Jeffrey Dahmer may not have been a victim of abuse, but other people may very well have likely been, and we think that these shows are the best mechanism to prevent these perspectives from disappearing. No, I'll take one later. But also, it's not just about Jeffrey Dahmer himself, right? The Jeffrey Dahmer incident becomes a case study for other criminals. It's not that you would think Jeffrey Dahmer specifically was a criminal who was abused and it was fine, but it means that other cases of crime due to like socio-economic conditions, because they may have had similar backgrounds and there are certain parallels between these cases, will be explored further and these awareness will be raised. The impact of these shows extends for more than one person beyond and seeps into the rest of society. I want to give you an actual charitable, reasonable setup. What is this motion going to reasonably look like? We think there are certain checks and balances that come with the production of these shows to keep the contents of these shows in check. We think it's unreasonable for prop to propose that all of these crime shows are going to suddenly glorify the convict as an innocent martyr because of three things, right? 1, there are things like critics from audiences, professional people that can call out, that actually have the ability to call out whether when these shows like unfairly produced content, right? But secondly, we think there are things like internal regulations. These shows often have internal check and balances like beta audiences to watch their shows and give them feedback before they actually release it to the public. Thirdly, there's going to be things like public backlash. Generally, audiences are pretty intelligent people, and it's insulting for proposition to assume that they are all mainstream following sheeple. Things like cancel culture, for example, the Jeffrey Dahmer movie is actually a good example of this. So producers, as we have seen, have a huge public incentive to want to make good quality stories that possibly share alternative perspectives to the case rather than what the prevailing narrative shares. It was ludicrous for proposition to squirrel this debate into rapists and sexual assaulters because of these reasons we gave you. We think that there is going to be extremes. We think that the profit incentive that surrounds media and media like this means that producers have an active incentive to produce good quality shows that regulate, like whether you're going to produce really extreme content, right? Because these are going to be things like social backlash for poor quality goods, because TV programs are elastic. People can opt into other shows. If they include inherently problematic portrayals like glorifying rapists, there's likely to be substantial backlash. Also because it's just very hard to find narratives that romanticize rapists anywhere or even excuse their actions in the first place. But further to contextualize this angle and its impacts, this motion does not impact white-collar criminals because there's no delta there. People like Joe Low are going to be committing money laundering and tax fraud regardless of whether there's more punishment on the side of proposition or not. The delta of the debate lies in the impact on low to middle-class convicts, and its links for DL to be clarifying this need to defend their first speaker's case. Proposition needs to be explicitly in this debate why telling the story of convicted criminals is so detrimental that it needs to be completely removed entirely from the world. Our counterfactual is that they are going to be producing crime shows that excessively demonize people, and my two subtitles will prove why. One, on why these forms of media serve as the key countervailing narrative to the predominant narrative in society. Because one, we tell you that oftentimes these convictions for these criminals are not necessarily good quality convictions. Three reasons for this. One, lots of crimes are done based on racial narratives like police brutality that paint disproportionately certain groups of criminals as worse than they actually are. But secondly, we think there is a huge inequity of access to legal defenses. For example, people having to rely on things like public defense lawyers and being locked up from accessing the best resources to support their case. So oftentimes we think that it's reasonably unsure that the conviction was based off of entirely fair metrics. Also, it's unfair to compare them to those people who actually have the resources for good quality lawyers. But thirdly, we think that there are also instances where convictions are made on a balance of probability and not beyond reasonable doubt, and these cases often lack sufficient evidence to prove that the person could truly committed the crime. So these three reasons undermine the assumption that the act of conviction already means that you are a bad person. But secondly, we don't think that criminals who receive these sympathetic portrayals necessarily have already been perceived as empathetic by society. We don't think that society has already empathized with these people. In fact, we think that they actively demonize them already. In fact, oftentimes they are perceived as evil. And two reasons for this, right? You see, we want to flip their analysis and say that it's equally likely that these convicts are demonized under their side of the house. But secondly, we think that people are likely to want to reaffirm their existing biases by saying that Black people are likely to commit more crimes because of these shows. Thirdly, we think that this narrative impacts our work exclusively on a much larger scale because programs like true crime shows and documentaries do have a pragmatic contribution towards solving these cases. Two layers. One, the actual analysis that comes out of these cases have historically helped lawyers and courts to remodify their victims verdicts to call for retrials. But secondly, we think that these crime shows as one of the public frontiers to increase buy-in for public justice advocacy must inherently be a good thing. All the transmission mechanisms of discourse like media virality and entertainment value also benefit us because even if we are able to achieve things like the public watching these shows and then going on to lobby for a retrial is something that we would prefer because the justice system has that obligation too if an avenue of perfecting justice is available to pursue it. But panel, even if you think these shows are completely useless, even in the worst case where these shows don't lead to any breakthroughs, it's still going to have an educational value because people are able to learn more about the justice system and crime. Side proposition doesn't get these, they don't impact their people. Secondly, why retribution is just not the way to treat criminals. We think that retribution is going to lead to extreme recidivism, where because the way society perceives criminals today is extremely disproportionate to its demonization already because of all the analysis we had already give you. Therefore, we think that the dominant narrative in the absence of these narratives that these shows are able to provide is going to be things like we shouldn't teach criminals basic education in jail, we shouldn't provide basic comforts to convicts in prisons. We don't see any intrinsic good in inflicting even more punishment than society and the justice system already does to criminals. This predominant narrative is going to be uniquely harmful on their side because the social perception of these criminals as evil is going to be far more exacerbated on their side. Things like ostracization, things like oppression are going to exist in a far more harmful scale on their side. But secondly, in the proposition's world, they're far less able to give good verdicts for criminals, because the dissemination of this narrative will seep into justice systems where far less lawyers are willing to defend these criminals, far less juries are willing to absolve these criminals. This forces criminals to end up with far less access to good legal defenses than they already do. Sure, it's not perfect on both worlds, but on side proposition world, the inequity of their justice outcomes is far worse. So in the end of the day, we best protect these vulnerable convicts, because when you talk about people who are in unfortunate circumstances that can't speak out, we think that we are much more able to portray these convicts in a more sympathetic light, which not only pushes them to speak out, but pushes the public to explore more, raises awareness, and receive things like help from other organizations. At the end of the day, we think that I'm very happy to oppose, because we've actually given you substances as to why these are the prevailing narratives that don't actually lock out criminals at the end of the day.
Thank you, Elo. Welcoming to the stage, DPM. You're here.
Hi. I'll take my PR2 first. Okay. Oh, sorry. By the end of this debate, it is very important to understand three things about the opposition case. Number one, it is not the job of the criminal justice system to spread awareness about issues. It is completely irrelevant to the roles and principles that the unique role of the criminal justice system in our society plays. Secondly, it is not the job of the criminal justice system to tell stories or to make sure that people listen to these stories. In fact, we have proven why it is the exact opposite. When you publicize these individuals, when you create these individuals and make them become celebrities, that is contradictory to the purpose of the criminal justice system, because what that always necessarily ends up doing is hurting victims. What is the job of the criminal justice system is to ensure that the message that we are sending about convicted criminals, specifically criminals who everybody knows is guilty of this crime, do not have any justification for the crime that they committed. The niggling doubt that side opposition wants to put into the minds of individuals is good for storytelling. It's good for people to understand about these cases, but it is not the role of the criminal justice system to do that. And that was the burden that we set up for ourselves in this debate. And that is why we are still well ahead after first opposition. The one thing that I want to respond to in first opposition is that this claim that people won't think Dharma is a good guy under their side of the house. I just want to point out to you just how much this missed the nuance of our first proposition case, right? We already preempted this. So first opposition says that on their side of the house, individuals will still believe that Dharma as a whole is a serial killer, and everybody in this room understands that. That's exactly the point. That's not what we said, right? It's not that we are saying that that these individuals on their side of the house are going to be seen as good people. Our problem was that you are raising doubt and you're giving a potential justification for Dharma's actions. And the doubt itself is the real problem here, right? Because what this doubt suggests, it is that there exists some sort of rationale that why Dharma did this is because he was abused as a child. We don't want that kind of rationale to exist at all, because it is incredibly disgraceful and disrespectful to the real damage that it has caused. And importantly, when you raise that doubt, it is going to obscure from the fact that this is a person who has committed an incredibly serious crime, right? You are saying when people think about Dharma on their side of the house, they're going to think of Dharma as the person who was abused by his father, abused by his parents, who was a victim of his own trauma and conditions, and not that Dharma killed people and he was a serial killer and he does not deserve that sort of sympathy on their side of the house. So at the end of this, what really is the goal of side opposition, right? They want to humanize all criminals. We're not talking about all criminals. We're talking about the specific criminals, high-profile criminals who are going to be platformed by these TV shows. They want to make these individuals feel sympathetic to audiences. That is disgraceful. That is not something that we can support under our side of the house. We don't want this doubt at all. So importantly then, why will the vast majority of these shows be sensationalized and dramatized? Because another piece of nuance that first opposition misses is that our case is not just about people who have bad incentives and have profit incentives. Though what we explain is that the vast majority of these individuals are likely to be profit incentivized and are likely to sensationalize and twist these stories in a way that is harmful. One, we explain the nuance, which is that profit incentives, even if there exist other benevolent incentives, the profit incentive specifically is going to triumph over the other benevolent incentives. We made it very clear in first proposition, because ultimately, consumers can say whatever they want and people can be good people. But at the end of the day, if you are a producer and you don't make a movie that is going to sell or hit big in the box office, your career is over, right? It's a direct personal impact on you. And that very proximate harm means that you're going to prioritize that sort of state harm against you over that of other things like benevolent interests to represent and create awareness. So even even at best, we are explaining why this is something that is good. The second thing, that audiences don't actually want accuracy. This is important, right? Because we explained that this proves that the market on their side of the house, even if you have more industry and more movies and you had a more competitive industry, the market itself is not self-correcting. The market mechanism only targets consumers. And what we explained is that consumers don't want an accurate depiction of this. That the reason why I'm watching Jeffrey Dahmer is not to go to the cinema and watch a 3-hour-long documentary about what the details of Jeffrey Dahmer and the exact specifics. I want to be told a story. I'm here to be entertained. I'm an audience member who doesn't have any personal stake in Jeffrey Dahmer, and I'm looking at this person and I'm watching this movie because I think his story is interesting. So it is necessarily going to be the case that audiences prioritize not being accurate, and therefore the market is not self-correcting. Which is why when First Opportunity says things like, oh, cancel culture is going to exist and call out these movies. No, there are many loopholes. Even if you ignore what we just said, there are many loopholes that directors can use to avoid this sort of cancel culture. Things like disclaimers, right? Saying that, oh, this is actually a little bit untrue, or some parts of this is made up. Things like the guise of sub-fiction. I want to note that these disclaimers are entirely tokenistic, right? Because it doesn't matter what you say at the beginning of the movie, because at the end, the message that the audiences are left with is that there might be a reason why Jeffrey Dahmer did this, and therefore we should be sympathetic to these individuals. And if they are not treated as sympathetic, then I want you to notice that none of side opposition's benefits actually manifest in any reality. If they don't create sympathy for these individuals, then their case falls, which necessitates that they create sympathy for these individuals, and they still haven't responded to why this is incredibly disrespectful for victims. The second thing, under cancel culture, right? Even if you are cancelled on their side of the house, the show is already out there, and therefore the only way in which they're able to regulate this is a reactionary mechanism that at the end of the day, after the show is already out, people are going to have their subconscious altered in such a way in which they will be aware of certain sympathetic narratives, even if it is not justified on their side of the house. So those that explain why the vast majority of shows are going to be sensationalized and dramatized, and the harm that we present in First Proposition still unresponded to the nuance. But also, right, we already explained why it is unlikely to be low-profile cases. So there was this piece of framing in First Opposition that, oh, we're only going to be talking like, that's sort of, we are narrowing the debate to like high-profile cases. I want to note two things, right? We never said, number one, that it's not about poor people. We said that the vast majority of these shows, because it is interesting, are going to be about high-profile cases. The reason is because those are the cases and criminal activities that documenters and producers understand that even if they put out any movie, they're going to get some sort of coverage on that. These are the stories that people most want to hear, and therefore they're going to do the most profit. So even if some of them are going to depict like average and like, you know, the average criminal or the humble criminal on their side of the house, we explained this already in First Proposition, that those are going to be crowded out by the much larger than life stories of Jeffrey Dahmer and other individuals who are serial killers. So even if those exist in the same market, right, the fact that it is there doesn't mean that it is prevalent in our society or that it's able to challenge the harmful narratives from these big movies and like Jeffrey Dahmer, that kind of thing. The reason why this is important is because if it is the case that opposition is hinging their entire case on the most vulnerable convicts in our society, it is likely that people in our world already know that these people are like somewhat justified, right? Because when they're talking about individuals who are like victims of like police brutality, okay, we explained very clearly on our side of the house, things like news reports still exist. If it is the case that these people have been so wrongfully convicted, wrongful convictions will still be acknowledged by the public on our side of the house, right? Putting it in a movie is not going to change anything. In fact, you're more likely to cause speculation about whether or not these wrongful conditions are good. I'll take that POI.
So on your side, you can only pick one case. Is this going to be impactful in changing people's minds or not? If they're only watching it for entertainment, why will they suddenly take action and try to justify these bad people? You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Dude, do you understand that you don't have to watch a movie to have, and with going into a cinema with the intention of having your mind change to actually have your mind change, right? The way that movies work is that they are a cultural normative force. So when you have these movies out there in the public, the ways that the people interact with that movie, all of those leads towards a way in which you're justifying these individuals, even on a subconscious level, and that is incredibly disrespectful. But more importantly, even if it's about really accurate ones, we explain that accuracy and awareness is not a benefit in this debate. In fact, there's more distinct harms. Firstly, it is incredibly traumatic for the victims of these crimes to have the darkest points of your life repeated and depicted on live television for a number of individuals. You know, when they filmed Dahmer, right, they never actually asked for the consent of these victims. This is atrocious behavior on the part of producers, and they were able to get away with it, and Dahmer is coming back for season 2. Secondly, producers can cause harm even if you tell the truth. Even if you're telling the truth, you are able to do things like leave out key details. You're able to skip over important parts. It is directly within the profit incentives of these producers to do such a thing. It is clear, even if producers are wanting to do something incredibly accurate, the harms that the state ought to interact with this and stop that from happening, which is why we are very proud to propose.
Thank you, DPM. Welcoming Diallo to the floor. Here.
POIs in chat. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The glaring problem with this proposition team is failing to recognize where this debate actually takes place. Because for a team that wanted justice, they would homogeneously buy into any state narrative, continuously push the promotion of the idea that these people are always going to be inherently evil, then no sympathy for those that were victims of the state is justified. I want to talk about 2 clarifications at the top of this speech. The first thing I want to clarify is proposition assumes that these people will just automatically buy into any social narrative. They attempt to respond to this, but why doesn't this work? First, as we explained from first, it's a small part of the show. So Jeffrey Dahmer's show did show his background as an abused child, but in never explain why people's takeaway of the show is Jeffrey Dahmer was a good guy and was justified, rather than the more likely counterfactual was that this is additional context that helps me understand. And we give reasons as to why this would be the case. Firstly, because of all the condemnation that proposition pushes for these people already being evil. But 2, within the show itself, it's more of a background within the story that this guy did commit some form of crimes, but rather it was the evil that you want to focus on in the show. What is the impact of this observation? It means that on their side, you're not going to focus specifically on Jeffrey Dahmer, but about other cases of criminals. And they never respond to this framing from first opposition, which is damning. Because even if you believe that this guy is bad, you don't explain why all other criminals that face the same circumstances are also at the same level of evil, which our case explains why. Because Jeffrey Dahmer himself is already seen as someone who's bad, more you cross-apply the new knowledge you have to other criminal cases to question whether society is just. But second, let's assume their framing is true, that people are mindless sheep, they buy into everything. That means they feed into our case, because we said the dominant narrative in the counterfactual is that these criminals will always be bad, which means you will excessively punish them. If all consumers are irrational and uneducated, nothing will change. They compound our argumentation tenfold. Their only response is to say some people will have doubt and try to justify. 1, yeah, people can try to justify. How effective that justification will be is another story, never proven by proposition. 2, what is the impact of this disrespect? You think it's funny saying he will come back for season 2, but the fella is already convicted as you claim. You had to explain what is the massive impact this disrespect has under their side. I think it's also equally disrespectful to the families of these people, other people who are in similar socio-economic conditions, that you just make stereotypes about the racial backgrounds of these people that end up harming others as well. The logic of their argument is we should never do anything that could reform criminal justice because everything is disrespectful to victims. Zero impact from that argument. Second clarification, their claim is that studios want to be sensationalized to be profitable. So I don't know what Yao Ming was thinking in prep, but dropping the phrase profit incentive isn't the magical debate-winning analysis they think it is. Oh, of course, very good for profit for you to glorify the rapist, right? So many people will watch the show. No people will boycott. Their only response is that they will seek entertainment instead of accuracy. The first thing is, I don't know why the burden is to have everyone wanting to be accurate and criticize criminal justice. Even a few vocal people who now become invested is still better than their comparative, which is no one being invested because they never bring these shows to light. But 2, you yourself concede to the POI response that you don't have to go into the movie wanting to change your mind because it's such a new point of view. People who are not initially invested have this new point of view come to them, think, maybe I was wrong, maybe I should consider another point of view. Netflix faced so much scrutiny for portrayals that even hinted at romanticizing this dude. And future studios hire advisors and market researchers to analyze previous shows. They tailor future media to be more careful. So over time, we get better portrayals. It's not all reactionary as they assert. A vast majority of it is preemptive because they don't want to lose their profits. They never responded. Can you imagine the insurmountable amount of backlash that will occur if someone tries portraying sympathy for evil people like rapists? Hate speech is already criminalized. Neo-Nazism is deplatformed. The fact they only wanted to focus on the extremes and not a reasonable version of the debate demonstrates how ludicrous their team is. 3 issues in this speech. First, on the countervailing narrative. Secondly, on more effective criminal justice. Third, my extension on productive discourse. First, on countervailing narrative. First, their principle is entirely contingent on practical outcomes because their analysis is criminal bad, so we cannot sympathize. It's really not clear why the criminal justice system is always perfect in its convictions. We give multiple reasons as to why they make false ones, and this means that people who there have this narrative doubling down on them, harming them even more. 2, state failure is not a sufficient condition to say we can never sympathize. I can just counter assert and say your criminals were also those that were victims of state failure. So you failing to sympathize with them is also a principal injustice. No analysis from their side. We never said for the job of the criminal justice system is to tell a story or spread awareness. We said that these shows were in a unique position. And note, if your case is really that this criminal is in fact convicted, what's the harm of having another show come inside? People can question, but if you're so so true and so confident in your conviction, it's not like you're going to overturn the conviction, right? If there's a gray area, we would rather have more information coming in. People criticizing whether the due process was fair or not. If it's so evil, the guy will be convicted either way. This debate is about the margins where something might be true or might not be true. They don't prove why more information coming in is going to be a good thing, a bad thing. Let's break the deadlock. Maybe some people on our side end up sympathizing. Maybe some people on their side continue to remain in jail. Which of these claims do you weigh up more to resolve it? First, we explain that in fact, these people on their side will continuously still be suppressed by the criminal justice system, so they will still already be criminalized. But for people on our side who are falsely convicted or people you don't want to sympathize with, these are people that have no other insulation or safety net because they were in fact good. We gave multiple reasons as to why certain people will be disadvantaged of a criminal justice system due to insufficient evidence, due to racial stereotyping, over policing, never responded to. Second issue on more effective criminal justice. The problem with the criminal justice system is that it's imperfect and retributive. And we explain why the counterfactual is a dominant narrative where all criminals are demonized and are said to be inherently evil. There's a reason society calls prison a civic death. There's a dehumanizing experience. You are tortured, beaten, and assaulted. Prison is often not a proportional punishment. The bruises and the mental anguish, the stigma extend far into the future even after you leave. The damage is felt until the day you die. Yes, we still send people to jail on our side. The difference is how the process of reintegration is constructed. On their side, you focus on retribution. They deserve to go through excessive punishment, so they repent for their sins. You vote in politicians that are tough on crime. You make these people more prone to recidivism. Two, on our side, we focus on rehabilitation, skills training them. And take note, all of your arguments is contingent on practicality on how you detect these people. Even if you believe they were evil people, they never explain why the solution is to punish them even more. Rather than on our side, we have integration. And given the debate is not about rapists, because we frame this out, probably this reintegration will be successful. Before that point,
this debate is about criminals who have already been convicted of a crime. So why will this have any impact on how the current criminal justice system functions?
One, because you start questioning the process behind the crime. Two, you agree with me, Jeffrey Dahmer already convicted. We won't suddenly ask him to be unconvicted. That's why the debate is about future criminals who then will face the similar due processes. Let's take them at their best. Maybe their side also gets some form of rehabilitation and reforms, but it's about who controls it. On their side, the decision-making processes, the media, the judiciary, the laws are all carved by people in ivory towers. They don't know what it's like to be in poverty, how much agency these people have. What's the comparative? On our side, because we set a precedence that criminals are not always evil, their voice matters, there's a lot of misconceptions about what good rehabilitation is. It's not about skills training and education. It's also about therapists and mental health, allowing for income and wealth redistribution. But these underlying socio-economic issues only come to the spotlight once you involve criminals in the process. That's why their best case is still insufficient. We win clearly. Third issue, my extension on productive discourse. I would note all the people who justify evil people, like anti-feminists who are conditioned in rape culture, are extremists who will believe misogynistic views no matter what. They don't prove why this movie is the source of it. But now, these shows create a platform for all people to discuss their views. So if you can reveal who are the people who are these meninists, who are in fact those who believe in Jeffrey Dahmer, you can single them out as people who are bad. What's the impact of this? The first is that you're more likely to be able to respond to them in a way that's more productive. So you're able to reveal their biases, challenge these biases, and bring it to a platform where everyone is able to understand why it's wrong. So now these bigoted individuals will reveal their beliefs. We can create better systems moving forward. On their side, they will still hold these problematic beliefs. We explain why criminal justice gets far fairer, and if these people are bad, they're still going to be punished on the side of proposition. Them saying it's no impact means their case has zero in this debate. We are so proud to oppose.
Thank you, Diallo. Welcoming Government Whip to the floor. Here.
Imagine you're a member of a victim killed by Jeffrey Dahmer. Then a TV show was suddenly made about your murdered son, and you weren't even contacted about the decision. This is literally what is happening currently on their side of the house. And the fact that they're saying that this is morally fine just for the potential of future criminals maybe being treated better is completely superfluous. The problem here is that these criminals, these high-profile criminals who have killed before, these serial killers who have killed and raped people should not be portrayed as sympathetic. They should not be glorified significantly, and they should not be made to make the audience feel and be sympathized for them. Two main issues here. Number one, which side has the most morally justified? And number two, which side has the better societal outcomes? Firstly, which side is more morally justified? Again, like my first and second speaker have said, these companies are profit-driven. They want analysis? Sure, let's go. They're going to talk about these high-skill cases. They're not going to talk about the average Joe in the majority of cases because they are simply not going to be as interesting. Many of these shows, right, they're gonna be mostly based on these profit incentives because that is what people want to see. They dramatize things for the show, right? They're not gonna have number two, they're not gonna have completely accurate depictions of these of these serial killers, of these events. Otherwise, the audiences will simply just watch videos or read articles surrounding it, right? They're going to want to play around with it, having an interesting plot, interesting movie, and as such, it'll be dramatized. And these audiences will want it to be dramatized as well, because that is what is intriguing to them, right? They're not going to want a completely accurate depiction because real life fundamentally isn't as interesting as these plot lines that these TV shows are propagating, right? Even if audiences on their side of the house, some call it out, it's not going to be enough to completely derail the show, and it's not going to be enough to outweigh these vast amount of audiences which just want intrigue, which just want an interesting show to watch, right? These controversies, so there was controversy surrounding Dharma season 1, and guess what? They're making a season 2 surrounding recounting the events of Ted Bundy in a more dramatized manner, right? Even if they have those warnings out there, people are still going to want to sympathize with these criminals and still are going to want to sympathize with the show, right? They've also simply completely not engaged with this argument about how the family of the victims that are killed, they're just simply ignored. They're not contacted about this case, and this is just simply not morally right. They literally have to. They already have had to live through the bodies of their dead children, their dead wives, their dead husbands, their dead daughters, and now they have to go through turning their deaths, their lives into plot lines for money, right? They're going to heavily this is going to cause a lot of harm towards due to past trauma, and fundamentally, this is going to hurt the victims. And they have not proved why these film companies have the right to profit off these victims' misery. They have completely not justified this and not engaged with this case whatsoever. Again, now let's talk about the criminal side, right? Why is it morally unjustifiable to humanize these criminals? There is no vote chair panel in which these criminals should be sympathized or humanized, right? These people are highly profile criminals. They're not going to be the average Joe, like we have said, and we have analyzed in speaker 1 and 2, like opposition is trying to propagate. This is just completely false framing from them, right? These are going to be highly profile criminals. They're going to have been killed. They're going to have done terrible things. What is this going to do when you humanize and sympathize with these criminals, right? They're going to think that these killings are somewhat justified, and we do not want a world in which these people even have the slightest doubt that these crimes are justifiable. It's going to make these people think, oh, you know Dharma, that guy, right? He wasn't a terrible serial killer. No, he was just a guy who was abused by his father and did these terrible things, right? They may not be the main point of the show, like second speaker point out on their side of the house, but the fact that they're in the show whatsoever plants a seed of doubt in the mind, plants a seed of doubt in the mind of the viewer that these things are somewhat justifiable, and we do not believe that these things are going to that this seed in general is justified on their side of the house whatsoever. So another thing, what these justifying these killings are going to do is going to spread negative ideas surrounding the mentally abused and the mentally ill and the abused, right? So let's analyze this. It's going to make the general public think that, okay, if you are abused and if you're mentally ill like Dharma, like Bundy, right, you're okay if these killings are normal for you, right? And it's going to perpetuate this notion that, okay, these mentally ill people are going to be more likely to be these killers, to have more likely to be these killers and do these heinous acts, right? It's normal if you're abused. It's going to spread these terrible notions surrounding these people. they also these killers, these are famous killers, these famous serial killers, they also want to kill. A lot of them want to kill due to be famous, and by glorifying these shows, by making these shows, you're playing right into their hands, doing exactly what they wanted to do, remain in history as a killer, as a famous killer. And they have again not responded to this. My second speaker has said this. This also could lead to potential copycat killers with, like, for example, the Zodiac killers. There was definitely more than one killer, and it was very likely this was the case, and the majority of them were just copycats trying to emulate the first Zodiac killer. And the reason that this happened was because of the media attention that was brought onto it. Before I move on to my second issue, yes, the POI.
Oh, nice new material on mentally ill people. It's whipped, it's too late. If Jeffrey Dahmer is already convicted, why is the impact about him and not about people rethinking and evaluating future criminal cases to sympathize with those people instead of sympathizing with Jeffrey?
Okay, no, sorry. Let's analyze this right. This framing that on your side of the house is completely unrealistic. What you're saying is that these people who are serial killers, who are hated, who are dehumanized, this will somehow lead to the minorities and the current criminals are like middling criminals being hated. Let's be realistic here. Just because if you see a rapist versus a person who stole something while being drunk or accidentally punched from while being drunk, you're not going to be like, oh, this person's a terrible person just because you saw Jeffrey Dahmer. Just because you completely hate Jeffrey Dahmer and doesn't humanize him, you're not going to think the same way about that person as compared to a normal robber, right? That's just not true whatsoever. This is also about people who have already been convicted. The judge is not going to change not going to watch these shows and think, oh, judge is not going to think, watch these shows and say, oh, we're going to make these sentences harsher upon these people just because I've watched the show. This is just completely unrealistic on this side of the house, and they have not engaged with my second speaker whatsoever on this issue, right? So on to the second thing, which side has better societal outcomes? So these people are always looking to, in general, people are always looking for a background, a way to justify what these criminals did, right? And this is going to grow into the idea that the criminal justice system is fundamentally flawed, right? It makes people question, and it makes these people think that there's more to the story when they fundamentally shouldn't. Why? Because when the criminal justice system is very simple. When the trials are already taken place, this mitigating, this extenuating circumstances are already taken into consideration when trialing these people, when determining their sentences, and as such, making these details, making the public question the criminal justice system in this manner is going to lead to a more questioning of the criminal justice system. It's going to make the courts have less authority, and potentially in the future, this could make the courts be more lenient towards these serial killers, these rapists. And now this may be a stretch, right? But we don't want even the possibility of this potentially happening for the small pro of this is going to potentially make future criminals be treated more harshly. Again, there's not much analysis of this on their side of the house, and the trade-off on their side is just completely not worth it whatsoever. So the best case is that essentially there's some positive attention surrounding the small amount of wrongfully convicted criminals, and these still high-profile criminals are still going to be glorified. Our worst case, victims are still hurt, victims' families are still hurt because they're not contacted, they have to relive trauma, and these criminals are still humanized and are still going to affect the future of the society in a bad manner. And as such, we take this case. I've never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip. Welcoming to the floor, Opposition Whip. Here.
Am I audible? Okay, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to test, I think there's a bit of an echo on your side. Is there another mic you can use, just in case they want to take a POI later?
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think it should be.
Okay. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I just want to note at the top of this speech that criminals like rapists or those that have done extreme murder are not going to be portrayed sympathetically. This motion doesn't say that all criminals had to be shown in a sympathetic light, because if they already committed such atrocious acts, there is no reason for these producers to suddenly want to sympathize them, because they will also be under fire, because they'll also be going against things like, for example, critics or the audiences backlashing on the show, because it's not in their best interest to do so anyway. They lose things like profit and revenue and etc. This is exactly why like this sort of like rapists isn't part of the debate in the first place, right? So if we want to move on to clashes, then let's just deal with some rebuttals that like proposition says, right? The main thing that proposition tries to like say repeatedly throughout all three speakers is that, oh, there's a Jeffrey Dahmer example. It's extremely like disgraceful and disrespectful to the victim, and it's also where like these producers and directors will portray these people as sympathetic. Look, panel, a convict who is a rapist as unlikely going to be portrayed as sympathetic. These people face backlash because it is already acknowledged by society that rapists are bad. A slight scene of abuse doesn't change the fact that these criminals are already rapists. People know. Proposition only debates in a world where like these people are so easily swayed by a slight sob story of a criminal that is already known to be evil, like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? They talk about this doubt the proposition has because of knowing that Jeffrey Dahmer is abused will ultimately change people's mind. Look, people know that in the end, he was the one that killed people. These actions that they have overrides that doubt. It's in the best interest for producers if these criminals are already highly disliked and critics like also already do occur, right? The next thing that proposition says is that, oh, audiences just watch these shows for entertainment and won't try to reform society. The question you need to ask in this debate was, when people watch these shows, do they automatically feel bad, try to justify the crime, or do they just do so for entertainment? Really explain that they are geared to do like the latter, right? Irrational people will be irrational on either side. We tell you that on proposition, the only thing that these people are going to do is take into account these stories, dehumanize any other future criminals who also experience the same like abuse, for example, right? You're unable to let them to come into things like reintegration. You're unable to allow them to actually open up to society to prevent future crimes, because you're already saying that these people are evil. You're already saying that these are villains, right? Government whip says we don't even want the possibility of this happening and future criminals, but you cannot win a debate on the 1% of cases. You need to engage in reality, right? In reality, right? We told you that, but even in the worst case, we're unsure why it is so bad that these shows cause things like speculation and the introduction of sympathetic narratives. We would prefer people having access to these shows to actually review more about criminal justice processes, about the complex socioeconomic conditions that people actually face in reality that drove them into a life of crime. This is the sole purpose of these like shows, for example, where we're able to help better like lower class people outside of the house, right? We're talking about the millions of other people who might be in unfortunate circumstances. Those in lower classes who experience this abuse, who no one wanted to help because proposition only demonetizes them. These sympathetic shows show that these are the people who are left suffering, who we on opposition are trying to raise awareness about and give the option for these people to voice out and get help that they so needed in order to stop the root of like the crime problem, right? Then I don't deal with this like major thing that they said about how, oh, the victims are going to be extremely hurt, it's disrespectful and it's disgraceful to show that their sufferings, right? We tell you that there's not only just one way for a victim to be disrespected. Isn't it also disrespectful to the victim if these criminals are demonized, go out into society and turn back into a life of crime due to a lack of integration and continue to harm other people? Isn't that also disrespectful to these victims? Isn't it also disrespectful to other families who wanted to seek help due to being poor, but they're getting shunned because apparently being poor is seen as a sin? Because if you're unable to have money, you resort to stealing, you're automatically deemed as a villain, because on their side, proposition only demonizes these people as monsters who commit crimes. I don't see how they're able to help anyone on the death of the house. But moreover, no one understands why this disrespect is so harmful when a criminal has already been convicted. We told you that for other criminals in society, you get comparatively much better public questioning of gray area cases, which opens up avenues to actually reform the criminal justice system. This is the unique benefit the opposition gets in this case. Moving on then to clashes. There are two main clashes in this debate. The first is which side prioritizes middle and lower class people and opens up their ability to actually ask for help. And the second is why is a higher understanding of criminals better for the safety and happiness of society, right? So moving on to the first clash quickly then. Notice how government never actually tried to engage with us in this point. They only talked about major and extreme circumstances, like for example, rapists and people who already committed like extreme murder, right? We told you about how they're only talking about like these people. On opposition, we say there's a trickle-down effect, and there are 4 layers of analysis to this. Firstly, watching these shows means the people who are the audiences receive educational purpose of how criminals have unfortunate circumstances, right? Things like, for example, abuse, divorce, or external factors are things that actually happen to people in real life. Secondly, we deplatform harmful stereotypes like colorism in delivering justice because the context that these shows provide allow the public to better understand other conviction cases around them. It changes the mindset that all Black people are criminals because it's showing that this is not always the case. We're showing that these people are the ones who are actually being harmed, who are actually being like experiencing police brutality and racism due to this, right? We're the ones who are allowing these people to actively seek change, to actively be able to integrate back into society and not be seen as a villain who lives their life, right? We told you thirdly how we raise awareness on how the reason why there are rising crime rates is because these things occur to underprivileged individuals that society doesn't know about. We flipped their claim on how criminals are going to increase because we stated under Outside the House, if these people have a chance to open up, to get like help from other people, it solves the root of the problem. The understanding of society and how they're able to open up to these criminals causes them to be reintegrated into society, which means that society is more accepting. So this prevents criminals from going back into a life of crime because now they know that society can accept them and that the society does understand them, and therefore they're more likely and willing to want to live a better life. They're likely to be willing to not go back to a life of crime because they know that like society is able to help them along the way, which is contrary to what proposition tries to say, because on their side, people are continuing going to be seen as like a bad person, and this means they're going to resort back to a life of crime anyway because no one accepts them anywhere else. We told you that this is like the unique benefit that we get on our side because if these individuals are seen as sympathetic, society doesn't push for retribution. We have things like, for example, offering them another option to choose from, like actively trying to seek help, having government giving them more of an incentive to cater to them. Before moving on to the second clash, KOIs.
So do you think it's a worthy trade-off for like having to serve a small amount of wrongful conviction in your side of the house for our harms?
What? Can you repeat that?
Is it a worthy trade-off to solve a small amount of wrongful conviction on your side of the house for the harms that we have stated in our speeches earlier?
No, it's not just about wrongful convictions. It's about convictions that can happen in the future. We're talking about future criminals who also have to experience these circumstances, who have things like experiencing abuse, right? We're telling you then that we're preventing those cases from happening, where we're preventing wrongful convictions from them, like to happen to them, right? We'll tell you how on Outside the House, we're only able to help these people, right? I'm not sure what you're trying to say. So moving on then to the second clash about why is a higher understanding of criminals better for the safety and happiness of society, right? We put the largest impact of these shows was upon like future criminals and the way they're actually able to actualize change in the criminal justice system. To actual zero response, we gave you structural reasons why we get far better justice delivered. Number one, the precedent that we set that not all criminals deserve to be demonetized, right? We tell you that how criminals on Outside the House are also human beings who also go through these like abuses, for example, go through these like unfortunate circumstances, and therefore there's a lot more open-minded that we have to actually help them, right? Secondly, the pragmatic change that we get when we're able to rehabilitate these criminals, we are the ones who then actually help to decrease crime rates. We allow these criminals to reintegrate back into society. We allow them to get rehabilitated and they're outside the house. This is what we get on this side of opposition, right? We told you that then proposition never actually engaged with our nuance. The impacts were on the already existing one or two high-profile convicts. Our impacts were not only on wider society, but also the future of said society. You only wanted to co-op analysis about the criminal justice system after we gave you the analysis. You have to credit us first anyway. The criminal justice system was always as unresponsive as their case. With that, I'd like to proudly oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Welcoming to the floor, op reply to wrap up op case.
Hold on, give me a sec. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. If third proposition spend more time listening to the debate instead of bragging about how good he is at poker, maybe they will have a chance in this round. And I hate to use this joke again. I wish I could call this team out for just mindlessly repeating the case and saying the same thing like chai tea, which means tea tea, or saying naan bread, which means bread bread. But they had an even more cardinal sin: new material in whip. All the analysis on stereotyping mentally ill people or copycat killers is completely new and it's really about the 1% of cases. If they want to go win the debate on that, go ahead. Like, come on, bro, have some faith in your previous speakers, do this debate some justice. Before I go into the issues, I want to make a clarification, which is, yes, the show is about Jeffrey Dahmer, but the impact of discourse and reform extends beyond the case of Jeffrey Dahmer alone. Why? Simple, because both second and third prop agree that the person in question is already convicted. So you won't unconvict Jeffrey Dahmer or whoever is the subject of this show. The realistic impact of both sides is that this is a stepping stone to approaching discourse on future crimes. So even if people want to justify Jeffrey Dahmer, what's the impact? I can say whatever I want, just as proposition has demonstrated. They can give a case. It doesn't mean the panel will buy it. So people can try to justify Jeffrey Dahmer. Doesn't mean everyone will immediately already empathize and say he's a good person. If this is the case, then they don't prove why it's very realistic that people's immediate thought is Jeffrey Dahmer was a good guy, rather than what we said was they are more structurally geared towards rethinking how they view criminal justice, thinking about the flaws of the system and seeing how they can make it better. If it's about people justifying future crimes that are not as evil as Jeffrey Dahmer, they don't prove why it's a bad thing, because we think more empathy is precisely what leads to more justice. 3 issues. First on victims, second on countervailing narratives, third on criminal justice reform. First on victims, they never actually impact this. They just say people will be disgusted. But it's precisely that social disgust and condemnation that feeds into our framing. You won't want to excessively glorify a rapist because that means that you will also lose your profits due to the mass amount of backlash towards your studio. But you know what? I'm going to flip their case. You know what's a slap in the face to the victims? You unfairly demonize the criminals, force excessive punishment on them, and they are more likely to be recidivists. When these criminals are not successfully reintegrated into society, that is when victims are harmed even more, because you never created a safe environment for them. You allow them to come back and hurt people more instead of what we said, which is rehabilitation and successful integration. They never responded from all speeches. The true victims in this debate were the brain cells of the panel after listening to this prop case. Second issue, countervailing narratives. I think it's incredibly ignorant of proposition to reduce our case to only being about a small number of false convictions. What we explained was that this debate is about people who may be those who are convicted, but the more realistic interpretation is that when this extends to future discourse, you can recognize where the criminal justice system is wrong. And even for these cases, it means there's greater amounts of information, countervailing viewpoints. So you see these people in a better light. And even if you try to justify them, I think that's precisely why on our side we get better forms of reform from the start, but also about why the comparative is going to be excessive demonization that they don't prove is going to be successful. So in this issue, we specifically explain why people, the people who are going to be most framed as sympathetic are actually those that require the most help. Because on their side, even if studios are going to be sensationalists, they never prove why sensationalizing in a bad manner is going to be what attracts these people there. These studios are in a unique position in history to change things about how people view criminal justice. That's power they cannot just waste away on proposition, which is why they don't meet the standard of the ban and why it's necessary. Finally, on criminal justice reform, once again, they did not respond because all of their arguments are contingent upon a successful form of justice. We explained that their case, which creates further demonization, only creates the cycle that makes more crime happen, because you don't solve the root of the problem. And even if they get rehabilitation on their side, it's never criminal centric. It's always what the rich people at the top think is good for rehabilitation. On our side, when you involve their voices, you get more spotlighting into the background. That's when people have, instead of voting for tough on crime politicians, instead of vetoing things like rehabilitation, they're more likely to be sympathetic for those people, which is why we went on reforming it to be better. It's the 8th time and my final time on this chair in this room. The ballot has never been clearer for opposition, exceedingly proud to oppose.
Thank you for our reply, welcoming Gulf reply to finish debate and wrap up Gulf case. Here.
Okay. Ultimately, opposition's response to our case is both extremely obtuse and as a result, oftentimes quite engaging. Because as early as first proposition, as early as that, we made it very, very clear it's not that people on opposition think this is a good person, it's that the fact that the doubt itself exists is the harm in this debate. This is a nuance that from first proposition we already mentioned. Still, none of the three or four opposition speakers have ever actually engaged with and still accused us of saying that he's a good person. If you don't understand the nuance, that's not our fault, it's actually yours. So importantly, right, the second thing I want to say is here, We never said that this debate is only about the extreme cases. What we did say is that number one, most of these shows will inherently depict crimes that are out of the ordinary. Why? Because people watch movies and TV to be entertained. We are not saying that all people watch movies with the intention of being persuaded in a specific way, but just look at the status quo. To quote that opposition, let's engage in reality. The popularity of shows like Dharma, but also TV series like Narcos, which depict El Chapo, the drug lord, are incredibly popular and increasing sympathy towards these individuals. They talk about their trauma more than the actual people that they kill. This is important. Even if they don't, the fact that there is a reason for why they're committing these crimes, that is the real harm in this debate, and they still haven't engaged with that. The reason this is important is because we explained that the risk of this getting out into the public and the risk of this stuff existing in this discourse at all, that there is a potential for you to even justify the sorts of heinous crimes that you're doing, should never be something the state should allow to happen. And that's why it is justified that we ban it. Umar says that Ethan is not listening, and he talks about poker or not. But then in the next few seconds, Umar then goes on to say that material about mental illness and copycat killings on us in the house is new material. Actually, that's completely untrue. We said that as early as first proposition. So who's actually not listening in this debate? I think ultimately it's quite clear why opposition's case does not engage with the nuance, and as early as first opposition, they demonstrated that to be true. The second thing I'm going to talk about here, opposition's case operates on a completely different metric than us, and they never justify why this should be the accurate way in which we adjudicate this debate. So what it talked about was that jail is civic death, so being more punitive is something that is bad. So let's actually interrogate this claim, right? What are they actually saying here? Because if you look at the case, what is the harm exactly? That the criminal justice system becomes more punitive for people? We already clearly outframed this by explaining that these are talking about convicted criminals, not future criminals or potential criminals. So there is zero reason why this has anything to do with future crimes. Importantly, it's about the victims and the perceptions of past criminals who have already been convicted. But two observations. Firstly, it's not the public who's doing the sentencing, right? It's going to be a judge of the court, a qualified legal professional with years of experience. So when they say things like, oh, if we say the public is influenced, then everybody is influenced, so the judge is also influenced. No, it is a very clear difference between a judge and the average consumer. A judge is able to weave around those sorts of biases. A judge is able to recognize that they have to make a correct legal decision. So they're not going to be falling to the exaggerated claims that they are identifying. But also notice, right? Opposition is trying to solve a problem that literally doesn't exist. Judges already take into consideration things like mitigating factors in sentencing. They already take into consideration your trauma. They already take into consideration things like, sorry, my time. They already take into consideration things like your race, things like your poverty. All of these are existing factors in the criminal justice system. It's called mitigating factors, right? So what problem are they going to solve? Judges on our side of the house still recognize the importance of mitigating factors. So at the end of the day, they don't actually have a principal harm in this debate, right? But the second thing I want to point out is that even if we're being charitable and accept that judges are being influenced, why is being influenced a bad thing? Judges are influenced by everything. That is the entire idea of common law and precedent, which is that you look at past cases and you identify how to punish people in the future. So this is a core principle of the criminal justice system. And in fact, what we explained was a few things. Number one, it's not the job of the criminal justice system to spread awareness. Number two, it is not the job of the criminal justice system to tell stories. And let's add on one more thing, right? It is definitely not the job of the criminal justice system to get legal reform. And so they have never explained why anything in their case is actually remotely close to what we have to adjudicate this debate on. The real harm that we have towards victims, the real doubt that exists on our side of the house is enough for the state to intervene and ban it, because the risk that we afford to individuals is far too high. Ultimately, opposition's failure to engage is just evident of the fact that they don't actually care about engaging with the case, right? Their hyperfixation, things like legal reform, miss the point, and therefore we are very proud to propose.
Okay, I thank both sides for the wonderful debate. Cross floors, shake hands, and the panel will move into room 1 to deliberate.
Thanks for the debate, guys. Thank you.